room today. That's very good. We're going to be talking about consumption and China's economy. And this morning, I heard the presentation by Premier Li. He mentioned several times the issue of consumption. And we all know that consumption takes up a bigger and bigger part in China's economy. I still remember in 2002, that's when around China entered the WTO. Export investment at that time started to take a very important part of China's economy, 1/3. So the distribution is 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. And for this year, for the first half of this year, consumption and international trade and investment, if you look at the distribution, the statistics show that the consumption takes a much bigger part. 75% I heard, but Premier Li said 60%. Only for this half, for the first half of this year, the number almost approached 80%. We'll talk about the reasons in a minute. We'll start with Chairman Ge. Shall we? You, I think, have an insight on consumption and how it is important in China's economy and what is the trend in the future. As you very rightly said just now, consumption in the past several years has been contributing more and more to China's economic development. In the past 10 years, contribution to the economic development was on the rise. If you compare now to 2007 and 2008, where investment took up 43 to 44% of the total pie. And I remember in 2011 or 2012, that's when, right after the aftermath of the financial crisis, we started our investment, increased our investment of infrastructure. So that's the 4 trillion package. We still remember that. Altogether, 10 trillion. So in 2011 and 12, investment took up a very huge part of economy. And international trade, as you mentioned, its contribution to the economic development is on the downturn from 2007 to now. And consumption, the rise in numbers is progressive every year. In 2012, it's 59%, and last year, of 29%, and last year 53%. That is the number for the first half of this year. GDP was 6.8%. 78% of that was contributed by consumption. So the consumption plays a more and more bigger driving force in China's economic development. So that's aggregated speaking. And if you look at structure, the consumption structure is undergoing huge change. For example, if you look at consumption as a whole, food, that's angle coefficient, it is going downward. 10 years ago, in 2008, the number is 38%. Last year, which is 2017, the number was 29.2%. It was the first time for us to reach a number below 30%. Which means that we've hit the target by the UN benchmark. That is we're more sufficient. You said rich country, basically, as you said. So, Chairman Ge, you talked about structure. I will ask the second question and the third question. So the second and third round will go in that direction. But for the first round, shall we just limit our questions to consumption, how big it is, and then we'll go into detail in the next round, okay? So I'll ask Ms. President Tsai. You are an expert on population, demographics. and its relations with economic development in an expert. I remember that in 2000 to 2012 WTO, as I mentioned, but the contribution of consumption wasn't that big. There was a 10% increase, but that's all. That's not dramatic. There were always concerns, as was talked about a lot at that time. So can you tell us about where we are now in terms of the relations between consumption and economic development? Very simply said, I want to talk about consumption and demographics. There are two trends that have an impact on consumption. First is an inevitable trend, that is the aging society. With the increasing number of aging people, in every society, there's a myth of retirement consumption. That is when people retire, or right before they retire, or generally speaking, as people age, the consumption will go down. Of course, the consumption structure of the elderly is different. In some parts of their consumption, it will go up. But if you look at the whole picture, the elderly people's consumption will go down. That is the issue. Now, shall I ask the definition of aging society? You're talking about people more than 60 years old. Is that right? Well, our definition is the percentage point of people plus 60 or plus 65. Both are okay. But the trend is very clear. The older you are, especially after you are no longer in a workforce, then you have very weak consumption. It is especially true in China. We see that older people, they have little wealth. So after they retire, they have the sense they have little income, so little consumption. And another thing is that for the elder people, their next generation or next two generation, there's a lot of pressure. So the grandparents need to take care of their grandsons, and also need to help them buy a real estate and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of financial pressures for the older people in China. And also, if you see that the proportion of rural consumption is going down, because the population in the rural area is going down. Now, does it mean that those migrant workers in urban areas, is it going up? No, because they don't have the household registration ID. They are not covered by the public service, not entirely covered by the public services. So they have more concerns. So they do not concern more than they were in the rural areas. They don't reach the level of urban consumption. Now, if you look at migrant workers, if we keep all the factors the same, ceteris paribus, if he has the household registration, so with that change, it will increase the consumption by 27%. So this is a issue that has both challenges and opportunities. So with urbanization, maybe we can solve some part of the problem. Right, I have another question. As the Chinese society ages to 2020 or 2030, this issue will be more evident. If the conclusion is that, as you said, when people age, their consumption is going down, expenditure is going down, then if that is the case, China, overall speaking, the total consumption for Chinese society is going down. Is that the case? That is true logically speaking, but countries vary among one and another. And if you have mechanisms, institutions, policies that can help you increase consumption as a whole. Now, we've got some restraints in China. We often hear the term that we age before we are wealthy. So there is a series of issues, public security, for example, safety net, for example. So these these are all restraints, and also there's pressure on the labor force. Now the State Council has proposed that we need to have more mature segment consumer market, because for the elderly, they have their own demand as consumers. So on some fields, their consumption is going down, but you haven't find out the area where they have demand. They have they want to consume. So if we develop these segment markets, maybe we can increase consumption in this area.
I mean, Coca-Cola. Yeah. If people think of consumption, it's Coke. I mean, yeah. You've been here, I mean, since the 80s, right? Yeah. I mean,
40 years now.
Yeah,
40 years.
Okay. So why don't you share some of your the consumption?
First of all, thanks for the economics lesson. I'm the marketing guy, so don't trust any of my figures, okay? I'm here to sell. No, but what we've seen is a tremendous change in the consumption patterns. And it actually correlates with what's happening with digital. And so what we're seeing is actually a mass customization, even if a brand like Coke, which is probably the most ubiquitous brand that everybody wants the same. We were talking a little bit in the ready room. People now want Coke with sugar, without sugar. They want my Coke. We even have a Coke now, it has fiber in it of 2 apples. So you see this, you actually premiumization of the market, intense customization of the market, which is good for consumer products. The empty nesters you were talking about, there's 200 million empty nesters. We see that as a tremendous consumption occasion for us for wellness drinks. How are we going to sell to those new consumers? And there's 200 million of them. So the scale in China, what's happened to premiumization, customization, what new brands? We have the largest R&D center in Shanghai now, just to sit there and focus on the new emerging Chinese consumer and their demands and taste profiles. The only fight I ever see in our office is over food. Who's got the best food? Who's got the best noodles? They're discerning and really in how they go about looking at different products, different taste profiles is probably the most sophisticated we see in the world.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Very well, Mr. Zhao. Can you first very briefly talk to us what your company is about, biotechnology? Very briefly tell us what you do. We do 2 industries. One is culture and sports. This is something that's closely related to consumption or consumption upgrading. Wukesong in Beijing, this is a heatedly mentioned word in Beijing. The other is health. We use biotechnology. We do a lot of R&D. We do cosmetic products. The hyaluronic acid, it is a natural element in human body. If you want to move your eyes, you need this product. So we do R&D and manufacturing, and also we provide this material to the cosmetic companies. So we do these 2 industries mainly. Right. Mr. Zhao, we'll talk about consumption upgrading. So basically, more specifically, which part will see more consumption?
So Curtis, he's doing marketing, and he can talk about the big economic issues. And you can also talk about your topics. And Joe, from McKinsey, you're doing research. I think you might have a deeper understanding on this. You might have a lot of statistics. So why don't you talk about China's consumption and China's growth? So what's your observations from the McKinsey's point of view? We are very optimistic. In the first half of this year, China's consumption grew by 8.8%. So very positive growth. And I don't know what the picture will look like in the second half of the year. However, overall, the driver for the growth is mainly urbanization and the people living in city area. This is the biggest driver. I think 40% of the people living in the city area is middle class, which means the people with an annual salary of 10,000 to 13,000 yuan per year. So is it annual salary, right? Oh, okay. It's 10,000 to 13,000 US dollars per year. This is what I define middle class. By 2025, I think the figure will reach 75%. So from 40 to 75%, so 40%. So the percentage of the middle class in the overall urban population. And now China's urbanization rate is about 60%. So it's about, so the number of the middle class resident is about, the number is 600 to 700 million in China. So in some other older societies like Japan, it's very different. And most of China's wealth is held by the younger generation. But in some other society like Japan, the money is mostly held by the senior population. So when we talk about consumption upgrading, there are a lot of areas where people want to spend money. Now people prefer to buy experience as opposed to product. Like they want to travel, they want to receive service. From February to July, the consumer confidence declined a little bit. But if you look at the bigger picture, we still believe that the economy is still a big driver of consumption. So I agree with Curtis. Indeed, I think we are very optimistic. And hopefully we can have 10 minutes for a Q&A. If you have any questions or comments, you're welcome to share with us. So now let's move into the second topic. We know consumption is important. And it's become all the more important. It's like 80%. So it's relatively on the par with the U.S. economy. So consumption has become the major contributor to economic growth. But this is not a stable figure. Yes, that's what I'm asking. So now consumption, we are doing very well, and it's promoting investments and import and export. Do you think, what is the driver of the consumption in the future? We are always talking about consumption upgrading, and there is also a turn, consumption downgrading. So what do you think is the trend of consumption? Is it going upward or downward? So I always use UnionPay, and Chairman Ge told me that you can use a UnionPay card to spend overseas, but don't buy houses overseas. So actually, UnionPay can help you settle the currency issues when you spend overseas. So what do you think is the trend of consumption in the future? How do we ensure consumption upgrading? Thank you for your introduction of China UnionPay. I'm very optimistic. And the consumption structure has changed a great deal in recent years. For example, the consumption on food is going down, and more consumption is going to experience, like traveling overseas. And last year, in 2017, the outbound travel reached 130 million. So, and also 500 million trips have been made in China domestically for the travelers, and physical checkups. Also, 500 million physical checkups have been done by Chinese residents. And Chinese people pay more attention to leisure activities, and this consumption is also going upward. And people now are making better use of credit cards for consumption. So we used to save money in the bank, but now we tend to borrow money. We can use leverage. So I can use my credit card and I can pay back 5 days later. And now the post-90s generation and post-80s generation have become the main driver of consumption. So there is significant increase of consumption by the post-90s generation. So it's like twice the figure of the post-70s generation. So I think this is a very positive trend for the consumption upgrading. And last year, for the first time, the imported consumer goods reached over 1 trillion yuan. So these products include milk powder and bags and cosmetics, and these are the main items that Chinese people purchased. So I'm optimistic of the whole trend. So President Tsai, I think continuous consumption is good, but whether can this consumption really be sustainable? I think this has to do with taxation. So from your point of view, the 80% percentage, how do you look at the 80% percentage? And I think it might grow higher next year. And how do you understand or interpret this phenomenon? I think 80% may not go higher in the future. We used to say that the biggest contributor, we always say that the contributor to China's economic growth is unsustainable. And China's economy needs rebalancing. I think this is not about striking a balance between domestic demand and outside demand. I think foreign trade has never reached the contribution of trade to economic growth has never reached 20%. It's always below 20%. So I think the most important driver is consumption and investment. And within consumption, the main driver is the residential consumption. And now, is it a good thing for residential consumption to go up? Of course it is. Just like Premier Li Keqiang mentioned this morning, we will not provide massive stimulus anymore. We have learned lessons from the past. I think this is a very good experience. However, how can we sustain this momentum? We can, because it's very difficult for us to maintain this trend because investment is in a cycle. And we need to think about the cyclical change. And meanwhile, we need to reform the income distribution system. And we need to increase the income of the middle and low income earners, because the poor people actually have a strong desire to spend. So increasing their income could help us to maintain the consumption trend. So I think Chairman Ge and other speakers talked about consumption upgrading, but I would prefer to use the term consumption deepening. So right now, I think most of the population is still low and middle income earners, and we need to use reform to increase their income. In 1990s or 2000, consumption maintained a growth of 9% or 10%, which is a mediocre and very moderate. It's not very high nor very low. And back then, People's Bank of China also did research and survey, which indicates that medical care, insurance, children's schooling are the biggest burden for the Chinese people, because they need to save money to ensure they get medical care and to ensure the schooling for their kids. So that is why they don't want to spend. So do you think we have passed this phase? I think China's social security system has been improving and dramatically. And now people don't have too much worries anymore on this front. So I think if we don't change other factors, I think this consumption force will remain stable. And now we're having shortage of labor force, and the labor cost has increased, and our economy has slowed down. And this will quicken the pace for capital to replace labor force. So in the future, our income growth will be slower than the past. And now urbanization has reached nearly 60% in China, and the urbanization has also decelerated. However, urbanization previously was a major driver for consumption increase and economic growth. So I think we are ready. If we can maintain the previous mediocre or moderate growth, it's good enough.
I mean, you really love to talk about. I mean, who's
who drinks the Coke?
Now you're a Coke.
Yes.
Coca-Cola. But somehow you have so many different brands. I mean, it's not Coke anymore, right? I mean,
no.
So why can you talk about it?
We're on this journey to become a total beverage company, obviously. And thank you, Mr. Wang. You've saved me a lot of money because I got the best mind with McKinsey up here, and he's not charging me anything right now. So
okay,
I'll send you a bill.
I figured. Okay, but it is a very interesting phenomenon that you mentioned about the younger people holding the wealth. And that's happening in very few societies. So as those younger people want more experiences, let's think of marketing in our sense used to be like the group trip. We had a little flag, and everybody followed that little flag, and we all got on the plane and the bus at the same time. Now, those consumers with the money, they want a personalized experience. They want something now that's for them. And so that means there's tremendous consumption occasions that we have to look at, whether it's tea, water, nutritional drinks, and to the older consumers, they're looking at what's the health benefit of this drink. So it's a dilemma. It's going to be a fun ride. We're nowhere clear to scratching the surface. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to have to do a lot of investment. Right now, the company has spent $13 billion in China. And that $13 billion is for 10% share of the total NARTD, a very small share. So we look at tremendous upside, but also a tremendous investment we have to make to where we have to get the right balance so that we can fulfill the need of a more demanding consumer in the marketplace. So we think it's a tremendous opportunity, but but also we got to get ahead of the wave before the wave drowns us, and get to talk to consumers in new language as they want to customize things, premiumize things. And I think it's going to happen across all consumer experiences. For cosmetics, they're going to want to have something that's just for them, which is very, very different from what's happened in the past.
So why don't you tell the audience, so from 80s, it's purely Coke, Coca-Cola, one drink.
Yep.
So now, how many different brands do you have?
The last 3 months, we launched 33 new brands.
Last 3 months?
Last
30.
3 months.
So could you name some of those?
No, I mean, it's Sprite fiber, Coke fiber. we actually have yellow bean with purple potato. Believe
yellow
me.
bean.
Yeah, we'll have to try it. And we have water fiber. We have coconut water. We have the whole spectrum. As people want to experiment more. It's like wine. Before it was red or white. In China now, everybody knows left bank, right bank. Bordeaux. So in that consumer, it's a great opportunity to be a consumer marketer, but it's also a very scary one. So you have to make some big bets.
So you say last month you launched 30 brands.
Yes.
So now total, how many brands do you have?
We have 275 brands now in China. 200. And 40 years ago, we had one brand, one package. And they said, well, you got to wait. You got to wait. The consumer doesn't want to wait anymore, right? The consumer wants tomorrow, and what you see, it's going to be a lot of fun. And what's even scarier for us, we're a pretty good marketing company, but we're a really good distribution company. What's distribution now? We deliver to 12 million outlets a day, but right now, I'm really worried. That's an outlet.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I can get somebody in a motorbike to give me whatever I want in 30 minutes. So I now have 1.4 billion outlets, where before I thought I had 12 million. So there's a lot of changes that have to go on to fulfill that demand. So it's going to be a fun experience, and I think only China is going to have that kind of experience. There'll be certain adaptations, but it's going to be unique. The peopleless vending machine, convenience store. Open shelf coolers. Those type of things are what they've done with the internet and digital is going to be a market transformation in what's going to be the world's biggest economy one day. So a lot of fun, but also a scary place too.
Yeah. 所以我看各位这个。
We talked about Coca-Cola just now. This is a perfect example to show that more R&D, more new products and brands that will push people to have more motivation to buy. If you have only one brand, then it's a bit more boring. But now you've got fiber, for example, and all kinds of different creation. I think this is very beyond my imagination to some extent. This was a new thing last week.
All possible, to give all the audience each one a bottle.
On the way out, just in time.
To try it out. 好，这个赵董事长，那你也是一。
Mr. Zhao, you also create an opportunity point. I still don't know what that chemical thing you were talking about. I'm still a bit baffled that hyaluronic acid. I have no idea what it is. But anyway, this is something new in a new industry or new way of motivate or push in consumption. Would you please elaborate? I think that you talk, as you said, you talk about consumption upgrading. This is a mega trend because I want to share with you some statistics. In China, Mr. Li said that from 10,000 to 30,000 US dollars, this is middle income. But for me, I think it's 120,000 RMB. This is the benchmark for middle class. And now, if those who reach 112,000, there are a lot of people. So that is consistent with what the professor just said. Among them, 90% are younger than 45 years old. 90% of the middle class are younger than 45 years ago. 45 years. And now, the middle class, if you look at these young people, especially those under 35, because that's our customer, target customer, or those who think, who have a mindset of less than 35 years old. So for these customer base, they have three things to where they have consumption. First is tourism, recreation. The second is something with which they can show themselves, selfie, for example. And the third is beauty, cosmetics, and sports. Going to gym, for example. Food, as we talked about, the consumption on this part is going down in contrast. So for the young people who are the driving force for the consumption are those who were born after 1985, 1990, or even 2000. So for some of them, they are already adults. About 180 million people in China, very young people. They want tailor-made products. So for them, they like service. They emphasize experience. And what they want is completely different from those who were born after 1960s, 70s, and 80s. Because for these older, people, they want more expensive, more famous brands. But now for the young people, that's not the case. They want good quality and they want a reasonable price. When they compare themselves, when they share among their friends, they share about how special it is instead of how expensive it is. So Curtis just said the tailor-made offering, I think it is very good. For my company too, when we do sports and culture industry, we increase experience. You said health products, didn't you? I said there are two. We do two. The first is sports. The second is health industry. For example, we did sports parks, and we also do offline interactive events. For example, we've got many sports events, IP events, and some of our products and consumers, that's from our Huayong of the Bloomage group. That's beauty products, injections included. So these are modern skincare products with modern technology. What we provide to them is something tailor-made. So for these young people, as I said, they want to have tailor-made solutions, something only for me. It's not about how expensive it is about how good this thing is, how suitable to me, how perfect fit it is for me, and how reasonable the price is. For example, some of the products we sell, we do not do mass advertising campaign, but is shared on cell phones, for example, or media, for example. So the young consumers can have access to things that they need. So it's not about the selling point, the physical space they consume. What they look at instead is that in which scenarios, in which situations they consume. For example, online platforms. When they read something, when they see the photo, they will purchase directly. So this is a change in their behavior, and we need to capture that. We need to capture the change in the young people's behavior, and this is the opportunity, very unique in China. It is very convenient for people to consume in China, and the online development is very good.
一下就是说这个。
Joe, can you share with us, in terms of data and statistics, the consumption trend, consumption upgrading? Where does that come from? Does it come from some certain industries? We talked about education, health, medical, so on and so forth. Do you have statistics to support? Where does this consumption come from? The consumption upgrading come from? The consumption upgrading, it has a feature that it is fluctuating. There's a volatility band. Basically, it means that there's a trend, hype for a certain year, and after that, it's gone. For Coke, it's the same thing. It has many brands because they can't predict which ones will have sustainable long-term success. So they have a lot of brands just to get prepared. So for the Chinese consumption base, there's a lot of change. And as it changes, it's upgrading. It is mentioned experience is very important. Yes, I agree. And also cost effectiveness is also very important. So if you look at opportunity window, where is it? The first is the health industry. It is indeed the case in point. The first is about medical. That's the inevitable part under the overarching theme of health. But aside from medical services, you've got physical examination, for example, going to gyms, for example, sports, and all kinds of sports events and activities. All these are under the framework of health, and people are very willing to spend money instead of buying a very expensive bag. So this is a major change. I went to the North Pole lately. I was told that many people are going to the North Pole. You said many things. It's out of your personal experience as well as out of your statistics. Is that true? Yes, indeed. Both from my personal experience and statistics. It means that consumers focus on different things now. If you look at the younger generation in China, they have wealth. But if you look at Japan, the younger generation will not live better than their last generation. But this is not the case for China. In China, we take it for granted that the new generation will have better life than their previous generation. If you think that, if you take that for granted, then that will change your attitude, because you think, I have the power to purchase this. Even I can't today, I can tomorrow. So he will take a loan, for example, to purchase something and to repay it in the future. So with the overall attitude is consumption, is conservative, but there are opportunities in which we can see that the potential for consumption is going up in China. This is one thing. The second, it was mentioned, online purchase. O2O is a key word. It's very important. We've got 750 million people who use online accounts. The total population for the rest of the world is relatively the same as that in China alone. So you need to, if you want to analyze consumer behavior, you have to look at the O2O. 50 app monthly active user is more than 100 million people for the top 50 online platforms. So if we want to win in the Chinese market, we need to focus on O2O. This is something you can't get past, otherwise you can't achieve long-term success.
And just now, the speakers have talked about this topic from their own perspective. And Curtis said that we tell our story by our feelings. Yes, I think their feelings are right and their strategies are right. However, we should also consider national strategy and policies. The national strategy need to be applied in the ordinary citizens. We talk about middle class and rising to higher income groups. And we should also consider the poor population and those living under the poverty line and those low and middle income earners. From the nation's point of view, we need to be people-centric to develop the economy. And in order to maintain the 80% contribution, the real contributor, we should encourage those people to spend more, especially those who are afraid of spending because they are poor. And we have 280 million migrant workers. And we also have 100 million farmers who have left the village, but they are yet to enter into the cities. So I think we need to turn these people into middle class, and then we will have more potential for further consumption growth. So a company's strategy is one thing, but a nation's strategy is another one. So we need to turn the poor into the rich. But how can we make them richer? So our income distribution reform need to be accelerated. So our consumption and our income need to grow further. I think we should grow by over 5% each year. But what is the contributor to that growth? And I think if the Gini's coefficient can go down, and then the economy will continue to grow. I think China UnionPay have a large volume of consumption data. Have you done any big data analysis? Because my next question is, all the people are using credit cards, but who are they? Who are spending using credit cards? Do you have such data? Do you also segment different consumers by their age? Who is exactly the consumers? Do you have such data? Our big data, we have a lot of data indeed, but it's not necessarily very comprehensive because some of the data are in the hands of the banks. As far as our data is concerned, people using UnionPay card and bank card are mostly the post-70s, post-80s, and post-90s generation. And the post-50s generation, many use cash. Yes, they are the older people. They tend to not to spend anymore. Yes, but I'm still optimistic. Our data suggests that the trend of consumption recently may be a little bit worrisome. For example, now the consumption growth has declined to 9.7% from over 10%. And whether it's a debit card or credit cards, we can see some increase in the consumption. And meanwhile, we also have some fluctuations in the currency, and this might affect the overseas travel plans. And we might also have a pickup in the inflation in China. And Chinese people made a lot of investment in the stock market and the real estate market, so their return on this market may not be satisfying. So I think this kind of consumption expectation in the long run might impact the economic growth. So our economy may grow at about 6% or 6.8%. This is very typical of China. We still have 1.3 billion population. This is a massive market. And the millennials, the younger generation, tend to use credit cards for spending, and this trend will stay unchanged. And the post-80s generation, I think it's also a contributor to consumption. Although they're old, they're also born under the one-child policy, and their pension will also be spent for working out or old people's education and also overseas travel. This will also be a driver for consumption, I believe. So the post-80s generation and the post-90s and the post-60s, 50s are also the drivers of consumption. But I think their consumption mindset and attitude are different. The younger generation tend to spend all the money they get. They never save money. This is different from the older generation. Do you think this is the trend? Yes, indeed. Credit card consumption is growing higher than the other cards. In the past, people don't want to use credit card even if they have one. And meanwhile, we have seen changes in the consumption behavior. For example, fast food and takeout food is one case example. In recent years, we see rapid, phenomenal growth of takeout food. In the past, we may need to work overtime in order to have our food delivered to our offices. But now, even if people are staying in their home, they don't need to work, they still want their food to be delivered. I remember last year, the waste from the fast food is about 11 million tons, which is several times larger than the previous years. So such behavioral change will also impact consumption. I think this is because of the technology development. Right now, we have it's very easy for you to order food on your mobile phone. And meanwhile, the logistic system is also very convenient. And meanwhile, we have the express delivery. Sometimes the food can be delivered within a very short period of time. So this also changed people's behavior, and that is why people prefer to order takeout, and they would rather spend more to order the takeout. Do you have such statistics regarding the age group of the consumers? Do you agree with Chairman Ge that the young people are the key driver of consumption? I think the UnionPay's data might be a little bit outdated. But overall, indeed, we do have such trend. And the young people is more willing to borrow money. And I think this is also, it can be a very positive behavior. I may not have much money, but I have a stable income, so I can have a stable consumption. This is a very important factor. And meanwhile, education is also important. And we have an overseas study, schooling overseas, and this is very popular among Chinese residents. Each year, about 500,000 Chinese students study abroad. And now, of course, we have a lot of students returning to China. And we have a diversity of education products. This is a major force. Do you have statistics? Yeah, McKinsey always produce a lot of reports and data. Can you share with us this data? I think what is most important is we need to look at two numbers. First, urbanization will still maintain a big driver of China's consumption. Now, China's urbanization is only about 60%. We still have room to grow by another 30%. And now Germany and US urbanization is highly developed. So when China's urbanization grows from 60% to over 80%, this is a very good opportunity. And second, only 40% of the urban dwellers are so-called middle class, which means that they have access to all the necessary daily necessities and all the products they need. And when we move from 40% to 75% for the middle class, I think this will be another driver. This is a very important figure for us because this is like a straight line increase. And this is a very good news for us. I can add more comments. We have a random survey. We collaborate with an e-commerce company. The increase of the post-90s generation consumption is about over 60%. And for the post-80s, 60%, and the post-70s, 50%. So this is the result of a sample survey. So do you have the figure for the post-2000 generation? Because the post-2000 have just entered into the workforce, so we don't have the data yet. So the post-90s generation seen the largest growth in the consumption among all age groups. So this is a very clear momentum. So we have a few minutes to go. Any questions or comments? Please pass him the microphone. I listened to your data. So your definition of middle class is 10,000 US dollars, which is about 60,000 yuan. And I think this is the figure he mentioned just now. And just now, the expert mentioned that this is the definition of middle class. So about 10,000 US dollars per year. So I need to then I need to go back and tell my nanny that he is already a middle class. Yes, so it's like 5,000 yuan per month, monthly income 5,000 yuan. This is actually the starting point for China to levy tax for the people. I think you can say whatever you want. As for the definition of middle class, there are two ways. The first is the relative way. You just use the median. For example, the per capita GDP is 150 US dollars, and then you have some, and then you can apply a 10% selection. This is not meaningful. And meanwhile, you can look at different countries, and then you can determine a certain level for middle class. I also looked at the research of World Bank and ADB. I think they also use some of this method. And personally speaking, I think you can set a standard for middle class, but you need to know what it means. I remember during the winter Davos, I already talked about this issue. Right now, the monthly income of China's migrant worker is over 3,000 or 4,000 yuan.
According to some definition, they are already middle income, belong to the middle income class, but they do not have the household registration ID. They do not covered fully by the medical system safety network. Safety net. Their children can't get good education, so they look like to be middle income people, but they do not have the habit of consumption habit of middle income people. So if I ask you very direct, Firstly, how do you look at this issue? How do we describe the middle income class in China? Personally speaking, it's not an academic dialogue. Your personal impression. I can't give an answer. But I think we need to look at different circumstances. It's not about one figure. It's about the public services one gets. If you can't get a certain level of public services, even you have a certain amount of income, you are not belong to the middle. You don't belong to the middle class, middle income class. And also, it's to do with the angle coefficient. If you've got very high income, 5,000 per month, but the angle coefficient is 50 to 60, then you're still not a middle income. But now, if you look at food, takes up a very little part of consumption, but people go to restaurants, very expensive restaurants. So if you use angle coefficient, it's not that relevant in this case. You can't tell a clear cut. The lady over there, next question, please. I'm from China, the China Financier magazine. The leveraging rate is 51%. What do you look at the leverage ratio? How do we maintain high economic growth while at the same time we've got low financial risks? What 51%? Leverage, household leverage ratio, debt leverage. My question is to Mr. Feng. Mr. Ge. Household income, if we look at it historically speaking, people's saving ratio is about 50 to 60%. And the savings ratio is in recent years going down, debt going up. Debt going up partly because we are now doing the household reform that is about mortgage. There's a very huge amount of mortgage. Although we've got measures recently this year to do deleveraging, but the house price is very high, so mortgage is still a big thing. Another factor is that I also talked about this. People have the habit to borrow first and then to repay. This is a habit in consumption. That's why the ratio is kept high. But overall speaking, China have the traditional virtue of being interested in saving, and they are very nice to their parents, which means they will give financial assistance to their parents. So I think the ratio in China is not very high. So don't worry. Right. That our time is up, but we've got very nice discussion. So a round of applause for our distinguished panelists. Thank you very much.